Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We are so thrilled to have you here. We are so incredibly grateful that you all came back after a year and a half away. Dear COVID. So thank you very, very much for coming. Two quick things. First of all, anybody who wants to sit, there's plenty of seating up here. And the speaker is pretty good, so you can hear up here just fine. The other thing is there is not going to be a bartender here tonight. So if you want a beverage or food, please go downstairs, order it, and you can bring it back up here. We do have a few tables set up, so you should be able to, or there are a lot of tables set up here. So please go ahead and get whatever you want to drink. It wouldn't be Science on Tap without the beer or whatever. So please feel free to do that. Okay, so thanks again for coming. And my name is Susan Knight. And Science on Tap is an example of the Wisconsin idea, an idea conceived in 1905 that the boundaries of the university are the boundaries of the state. And our partners in Science on Tap include UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, the Minocqua Public Library, the Lakeland Badger chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, Trout Lake Station, also part of UW, and our brand new partners, Oak Fire Pizzeria and Bar. So thanks so much to them for hosting us and allowing us to use this beautiful new space, this beautiful new restaurant. And Science on Tap is supported by a grant from the Brittingham Fund from UW-Madison. So there are three ways you can watch. You can watch us in person right here as you are. You can also watch on YouTube. We're not doing Zoom anymore, but you can watch on YouTube and you can ask questions. Or you can watch events later. We do record these and you can watch them later if you like. Our next event on January 5th, hard to imagine, only a month away, it'll be a new year. Michelle Nault, close friend of mine, of the Wisconsin DNR is going to talk about aquatic invasive species and especially plants like Eurasian water milfoil that we all know and love so much. Tonight we have Jeremy Holtz of the Wisconsin DNR, and Jeremy grew up hunting and fishing and camping in northern Wisconsin. He earned his BS in wildlife biology from Colorado State University in 1998, and he worked in Colorado, Kansas, Wisconsin, and Minnesota before taking the opportunity to return to his home state of Wisconsin as a wildlife biologist in 2006. Jeremy is a certified wildlife biologist with the Wildlife Society and is the Wisconsin DNR wildlife biologist for Oneida County, where we are right now. A unique feature of his position is the special focus on working with private landowners to improve early successional habitat for ruffed grouse and woodcock in the 6 counties in north central Wisconsin. And he's also serving as the facilitator for the Wisconsin Young Forest Partnership since 2015. He lives in Rhinelander with his wife, Carol, and 3 teenage sons, Jay, age 17, Brett, age 15, and Trey, age 13. Kind of amazing. He just shows up, I would say. I've had kids that age. If you listen to WXPR, our local public radio station, you know Jeremy as the masked biologist. And he brought us interesting stories about wildlife and his experiences in the field every week for 5 years. Yeah, I do a little story 3 times a year, and that's a challenge. So I don't know how he did it every week, but they were wonderful to listen to. So I really love these segments, and I'm sure many of you did too. Okay, so we're continuing with our tradition of a trivia question, a little different format this time. Jeremy was out in a boat doing water quality sampling with a colleague from the Clean Water Partnership as a favor to this other guy. And the other guy's boat quit working while they were out on the water, setting them adrift. The colleague could not swim. So he said, well, what are you going to do? Well, they flagged down a passing boat to, so what did they do? They flagged down a passing boat to tow them back to shore? Nope, no boats out on the water that day. Did they row all the way back to shore? Nope, no oars. So Jeremy stripped down to his underwear, jumped in, and swam them back to shore, towing the boat the whole way. Now, here's your question. If it were you, would you be more embarrassed if A, you were the guy who had asked for help in the field, but had a lousy boat or a boat with a lousy motor, no oars, and couldn't swim, or B, you were Jeremy who had to strip down to his underwear out in public, tow the boat back to shore, and live with wet underwear under his clothes the rest of the day? All right. All right, here's Jeremy Holtz.
All right, thank you for that great introduction. And it's great to see so many people here tonight. I see a couple of faces that I recognize and a couple of ringers in the audience. So try not to be too hard on me. This is the first time we're getting to interact in a public here for a year and a half. So I'm excited to say that this is my first formal in-person presentation since the COVID lockdown began. So as mentioned in my introduction, I am a wildlife biologist. I have been for 15 years in Wisconsin. I work with early successional habitat, ruffed grouse, woodcock. And if you saw the picture on the poster, I was holding a little golden wing warbler in my fingers. His name was Little Jer. And he wore a backpack down to Nicaragua and back for 2 years to give us some migration information. But since they're in Nicaragua this time of year, was when I was asked what I'd be willing to speak about, I thought I would take another topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that's porcupines. Porcupines are probably one of our most poorly understood animals in northern Wisconsin. And as a biologist for Oneida County and Rhinelander, they make up a large share of my calls. I would say 25 to 30% of my calls involve some kind of issue. Sometimes it's badgers or other animals, but porcupines are high on the list. So the reason I started getting interested in porcupines is because one day I got a phone call from a landowner in Forest County, and he said, I want to know what I can do about this porcupine. He's eating my favorite hemlock. And I said, well, they're unprotected. You can shoot him. He's like, no, I don't want to kill it. I just want to save the tree. And I said, well, gosh, no one's ever said that before. So I started doing some research, talking to foresters and looking up research papers and trying to find some information, talking to property managers. And I started working with this landowner on solutions on how we could save this hemlock. So he built an exclusion. He built a piece of slippery steel around a tree so that the porcupine could not get up the tree anymore. And I thought, we're done. Dan's all set. Well, he called me up. He said, the porcupine's back. It's chewing on my tree. And I said, I don't understand. How could that be? And he said, do you suppose they could climb a tree stand? I said, a tree stand? He said, well, yeah, my son left the bow stand up. I said, yeah, they could definitely climb the tree stand. He said, well, my son said, I'm getting really angry. I'm just going to shoot this. And he said, you shoot that porcupine, you're never going to come back and hunt on my land. To his own son. I'm like, wow, that is pretty intense. And he said, well, I'm kind of in a battle of wits with this porcupine, and I kind of want to see how it turns out. So credit to Dan for getting me interested in porcupines. And since that time, which is over 10 years ago, I've given this presentation at Crystal Lake Nature Center and other places around northern Wisconsin to over 1,000 people. But this is the first time I'm doing it without visual aids, without PowerPoint, without my sons acting out how porcupine quills work. So this is sort of Jeremy unplugged. So hopefully if you see me start gesturing and waving and measuring with my hands, you understand why. So porcupines. Porcupines are in the rodent family. They are the second largest rodent in North America. This is semi-interactive now. What's the largest rodent? Somebody in here knows. Somebody said beaver. That's correct. Now there's going to be somebody in here who says, wait, what about the nutria? I'm not counting non-native semi-rodent. Okay, I'm talking native rodents. Beaver is the largest, but porcupine comes in a close second. An adult can weigh up to 30 pounds, which is a lot of meat. It's a lot of meat on a porcupine. They are, because they're rodents, their teeth never stop growing. Normally, this is where I have a little porcupine skull, but I didn't bring it along because it's very fragile. And besides, I guess with COVID, I'd have to wipe it with a bleach wipe between each person. But their tooth roots go up toward their brain, very high up in their skull, and they have to chew their whole life to keep wearing down the ends of those teeth. And they might have to grind or gnash their teeth if they can't find something good enough to chew on. So they never stop chewing. And so these are extraordinarily long-lived rodents in the wild, where they have to face winters and predators and injury. They might live 6 or 8 years, but they've been documented living 18 years in captivity. And what kills them is their teeth. When their teeth stop growing, they die. Or if they don't grind their teeth enough, the roots actually will start to go backward and protrude into the brain case and cause injury and death that way. So it's a tough life for a rodent. I was always told you can always tell beavers, the largest rodent, you can always tell a contented beaver because when they chew on a tree, they have nice, smooth tooth marks, not serrated. If it's serrated, it's not a happy beaver because their teeth are too long. So that's how you can tell if your rodents are content. See, you've already learned something new today. We're only a couple of minutes in. So, porcupines are specially adapted for climbing trees. Not usually tree stands, but they're interestingly enough, they've got to have a couple of things to work together in order to climb a tree. They have special rough heel pads that help them kind of grip on the bark. They've got some little very effective claws that help them dig in and pull up. They also have a short club-like tail with the quills point downward and away from the main body. And what they can do is it's prehensile. They can press it against the tree and put their body weight on it. And so that'll help prop them up like a little stool. So you can see me on YouTube, right? They're going like this up the tree. See? So all these things work together and help them be very effective at climbing trees. Why do they climb trees? Because trees are their main prey. They live off of trees. They like to chew the bark. It's probably the chewing is good for them. They like the sap, but in a little bit I'll talk a little bit more. There's a wide variety of things they chew on. Some you might approve of, some you wouldn't. But with that, they're built for eating trees, so they don't need very good eyesight. They have excellent defense. They don't have to worry too much about predators. They don't have to have very good hearing. Rodents aren't the best at hearing. Very good sense of smell, so they can smell their food. And they're mostly nocturnal. Now, why would a built-in defense plant-eating rodent be mostly nocturnal? Why? Oh, man. Okay, somebody said so they don't get eaten. Well, we know that there are quite a few predators out at night, like owls. I have a slideshow with a great picture of an owl that was literally killed by a porcupine. It dove down on it, and it got quills in the eyes and killed it instantly. So while predators that may have something to do with it, or interference, we'll call it, the main reason is because their prey is most delicious at night, right? Botany, right? That's when plants are, they're not actively photosynthesizing. There's transport going on, and that makes them extra delicious. So that's most nutrients are most available to them at night. So we'll see them sometimes during the day, right? They'll be waddling somewhere, but a lot of the car strikes or whatever we see, they tend to be at night because they tend to be moving around looking for the best food. So the porcupine's Latin name is Erythizon satum. It's Latin, sort of. And I've seen a couple of different explanations for that. One is rises to anger, and one is irritates with back. Dorsatum, dorsal, makes sense. Erythizon, rise up. The point being that they hurt the most from behind with the quills. They lay flat, point backward, and also rises to anger. They can flex their skin, and they can bring their quills up. They can raise them up. So whichever, maybe it's some of each. Maybe that's where that name comes from. But whatever the case, it's a pretty appropriate name. It's a very odd name. When my kids were growing up, they'd watch shows about porcupines, and the porcupines they'd show on TV were never the porcupines we have here. You ever notice that? They've got quills like this long. They look like javelins. They're big black and white striped things. Those are African porcupines. The porcupine family is actually very large. There's 27 varieties of porcupines. We have here in the Great Lakes, we've got the North American porcupine, of course we do, and it's centered mostly around the Great Lakes and up into Canada. It's really a pretty regional animal. And there are some porcupines, because they're rodents, in some cases they tend to hibernate when the weather gets colder, but the North American porcupine, our porcupine, does not. It just grins and bears it like everybody else. So, yeah, it's the only porcupine in the world adapted to cold winter temperatures, just like Great Lakes residents. So there are porcupines. Well, you've got more like hedgehogs over in Europe, but there are porcupine species found around the globe. Yeah. Our porcupines here are from this area. They're from the Canadian Shield, and basically from Pennsylvania, just west of western Minnesota, basically. Oh no, it's a separate species. Yeah. Yep.
Can I remind everybody, we will have a chance to ask questions, and Carol will have a microphone, and then everybody can hear. We just don't want.
It's my fault. It's a teacher in me. I tend
Yeah,
to interact
no,
with
it's
people
all
and
right.
ask them
It's all right.
questions.
We're relearning how to do this.
So where do porcupines live? They live wherever they want, right? If you're a porcupine, it's pretty hard to evict a porcupine. So this is how a porcupine, they live in dens, and what they do is they climb up in a tree and they watch an animal dig a den, and then when the animal leaves, they go down in the den, and that's pretty much it. So, they'll watch for a badger or a coyote, and they'll let them do what they're going to do, and then they just go in head first, and it's all over pretty quickly after that. So this time of year, hunters tend to find them under tree stumps or upturned root balls or under old logs. The porcupines aren't terribly picky, especially since they don't hibernate. They're not too worried about finding a warm spot to spend the entire time. I mentioned that they find a tree. Porcupines like to torture their favorite tree. It's called a loafing tree. And in my friend Dan's case, it was a hemlock. They unfortunately like trees that are very hard to grow to eat and torture. So what they'll do is they'll find a tree, and it's where they go to loaf. It's where they go to just relax and chill. And they'll just start slowly stripping the bark all around it, all around the branches. They'll just start stripping the whole thing down. And they will eventually kill the tree. But they do it out of love. It's a love relationship. And so these are common. You will actually see them, especially this time of year with the leaves down. It's a little bit easier to see them when they're out in the woods. There's a couple of things that identify them. One is the bark is obviously literally peeled with teeth. And the other is all around the base are porcupine droppings. Now, since they mostly eat twigs and bark, their droppings are basically pelletized sawdust. And they're, here I go gesturing again. They're about the size of, I guess, a chocolate-covered almond. I don't know. Those really small pine cones you get off jack pines. They're like that size. But once you've seen them before, you can't miss them. And they tend to pile up, especially under the loafing tree. But in the growing season, so in the winter, bark is pretty much all they got. In the growing season, they seek out those nice leafy green vegetables. Who doesn't? Leaves, twigs, green plants like skunk cabbage, clover, and lupine. It works well for them because they love all those nutrients of those bog plants, all the minerals. And also porcupines do not quite like a skunk, but they do emit a musty odor. So this will help them build that up. Um, and this time of year, we finally got snow, right? So if you want to see where a porcupine goes, their tracks are very unique because when they walk, their quills drag in the snow. So if you want to try to find a porcupine this time of year, you can usually find their track pretty easy and follow it because they don't walk very far. You can usually follow it right to their loafing tree or their den. So it's pretty easy to observe them this time of year. I don't know. I have a couple more things about that, tracking them and stuff, but it just doesn't really look like the porcupine tracking crowd. No offense. I mean, if you want to track them, that's great. I thought maybe we'd get a little more into the mating season. Chicka, wow, wow. So, I always ask this question in my crowds: how do porcupines mate? Oh, have some of you been to my talk before? That's right, very carefully. The porcupine is a hopeless romantic. So this is what they do. The female is hard to approach at first. She's not really excited to be bred, and you can kind of see why. They're porcupines. So what the male does is he sings to her. He vocalizes. I've heard it's like a baby shrieking. You know, a lot of times when people, they mix it up with like a bobcat squeal or a bobcat shriek. So they do this caterwauling and they follow her around singing to her, sometimes for hours or even on or off for days. And what they'll do is occasionally they'll spray her with the male will spray her with urine. And she won't like it if she's not in the mood. And so when I moved into my office at Rhinelander, Ron Eckstein had this book, Porcupines of North America, and I was reading it, and this person had given names to her porcupines, and I was reading it. It's like, you know, Janet wasn't really interested, so she was out on the end of the branch, but then Robert was insistent. I talked about he continually bathed her with urine until she finally became receptive to him. So if you guys are wondering how to find a girl, do not follow the porcupine path. It's probably not the best way to go. So, yeah, so we sing, we do an elaborate dance, shaking our quills. We mercilessly shower the female with urine. When she's ready, she folds her tail back over her back. Now, remember, I said the quills are pointed away from the body. So when she folds her tail up over her back, the quills are pointed forward, giving the male a safe landing pad. And then it's not important to talk about what happens after that, but it does happen for several hours. So good for porcupines. Good for porcupines. So porcupines have a 7-month gestation period. Imagine that, ladies, carrying a baby for 7 months. Oh my goodness, that must just be exhausting. It's very long for a rodent, though. You know, we're usually talking weeks, and now we're talking many months. And porcupines only have one baby, one. Low fecundity, we call it in my line of work. You know, most animals, if they only have one young, they have a hard time keeping their populations up. You know, like whales. You know, if you lose a cohort, you're going to have a hard time making that back up. But they are not covered with painful spikes. So in that realm, the porcupine babies are born head first, in case you're wondering. Everything else is pretty normal about porcupine birth. Our babies are born head first too. But their quills are soft in the womb. In fact, porcupine quills soften up with water. So they're pretty easy to get wet and be soft, but you still want them coming in sharp side down. And so the porcupine babies are born, and then within about a half hour or so, those quills are good and stiff. And the babies, especially the quills, are extremely sharp. They're very sharp because they haven't been walking around the woods and rubbing them on stuff and kind of making them dull. And so the babies stick with mom for like 6 months, but they really only nurse for a couple of days, and then they start going right to feeding on, you know, foods. their branches and twigs and green plants. Um, so yeah, the porcupine's one baby, and that baby is called either a pup, which is pretty boring, or a porcupet, which is apparently a big deal. So go home and tell people you learned that a porcupine bears one porcupet. By the way, does anyone know what a group or a herd of porcupines would be called? Yeah, very unusual. They're solitary animals. It's a prickle. It's a prickle. So if you see a prickle of porcupines running across the road, make sure you put it on YouTube. So prickle, right? Obviously, porcupines' quills are their most obvious feature. And normally I have a handful of quills and I'm playing with them and sticking them in my hand as I'm talking and I'm handing them out to the audience. You're just going to have to live with visual explanation, but porcupine quills are just a couple inches long. They're shorter on the belly and on the cheeks. They're longer on the back especially. And they are spongy. They're spongy in the middle. They've got kind of a hard, it's sort of like squeezing a straw. You squeeze a straw, it's stiff, but it gives. And then on each end is a hard, crusty tip. It's sort of shaped like a javelin. And those tips are actually layered scales. And so I think it's very interesting design. It sticks in the flesh of the animal. As soon as it gets the body heat, those porous cells inside swell up and it opens sort of like an umbrella inside the skin. Very hard to pull out. Very hard to pull out. So the porcupines cannot throw their quills, much unlike what the Woody Woodpecker cartoons say or whatever. Sorry, they can't throw them. They can drop them though. When they flex their muscles on their back to raise the quills to defend themselves, they have overlapping sheaths of muscle that shift like this, and they become about 40% looser pores around the quills. And so if they're dancing around and they're shaking, the quills can fall out or kind of fling out, but they don't launch them. They don't launch them like in some of the cartoons. So wild animals are kind of just stuck if they get quills in their face, right? They're kind of just, you live or you die, you go blind or you don't. We've been able to actually track the paths of some animals like cougars, what states they've been in by looking at their porcupine quills that are in the face of the animal when it's killed. We can look at the mineral content because it's like our hair, right? You are what you eat. So you can look at those quills and you can see what different states that cougar has traveled across. But what do you do if your dog gets porcupine quills? Anybody here had their dog quilled? Oh yeah, okay, you and me. Yeah, so my dog went in, got a mouthful of quills, got out and started squealing and rolling on the ground. And I was a mile from the truck, and I did the only thing I thought I could do, and that was because I had already started working on this. I pinned her down and got my Leatherman out, and I just started pulling quills one at a time. The dog very quickly learns you're trying to help it, and they become surprisingly cooperative, unless you have one of those dogs. There are some dogs that just want to kill everything. But if you don't feel comfortable pulling quills out yourself, of course, take the dog to a vet. Be careful about things like the eyes. I wouldn't pull a quill out of my dog's eye, but the ones that were stuck between her teeth or in her tongue, I was able to get those out quickly and get her some relief until I could get her to town. Some people say you got to cut the quill and let the air out. There's differing opinions on that. A lot of the quills break in half just from the trauma of interacting between the dog and the porcupine. But you can use your pliers and just go in there and pull them out one at a time. And sometimes those little scales on the ends of the tips will get stuck in there and lodge in there, but eventually they'll work their way out. So there are things you can do for your own animal, for your own pet. I always carry a pliers with me when I'm out in the woods, but it's, again, I can't tell you what to do. If you're not comfortable, seek the help of a vet. So I have lots more about porcupines, but I was told I got to keep it on the short side so that I have time to be tortured by questions. So I think what I'll do is I'll switch to a more interactive part of the evening and see if folks have any questions.
Great. Okay, so Carol's going to walk around like she always used to, and you can now ask your questions and speak into the microphone. Hold it up nice and close to your face, and we'll go from there.
For you. Oh, are we on? Okay.
I have an elderly friend in his 90s whose family owned a resort called the Blue Island Resort over towards Arborvitae somewhere. Anyhow, their bar, when he was a kid, had a porcupine that visited every afternoon, and they fed it peanuts. And it was a real pet, and one day it brought in a pup.
Yeah, so that's a great point. It's one of the things that I didn't include in here. With the porcupine is one of Wisconsin's. It's not a game animal, and it's not a non-game animal. It's just an animal. So you can shoot them on site. You can bring them in the house and make them a pet. Any of that's legal. So they're not a managed animal in Wisconsin. But yeah, that's always exciting. When you start feeding an animal, you should expect eventually you'll be feeding a lot more animals.
Yes, do they chew on rubber tires on your car and bicycle?
So the information that I have, the indication I have is they wouldn't do it because it tastes good. They would do it because they're trying to wear their teeth down. However, they are such big fans of salt that if it was like the winter time and you had salt on your tires or from brine, that they might be chewing and licking on the tires to get the brine out of the treads or off the sides. So it's never come up in any of the literature, but I could entirely believe it up here that it might happen.
Have you wrap screening around your car when you're out camping overnight?
Yeah, I can always tell people if you have a problem, you can exclude it. And there's a lot of different ways that you can address it. But the good thing about porcupines is, although they're pretty well designed for climbing trees, they're not very good at getting over obstacles. So it's pretty easy to exclude porcupines from, say, a camper or a deer blind with pretty simple mesh or hardware cloth.
Are all the global species of porcupine, do they all have similar diets, or do they have insectivores, omnivores, etc.? And if so, do they look different if you're talking a porcupine species across the world?
So I'd be lying if I said I've looked deeply into all 27 species of global species of porcupine. But the way I look at it is because their morphology is so similar, they're slow moving, they have poor vision, they have protruding quills, that it's likely that they're primarily herbivores. They're primarily plant eaters. I suspect that, like any animal, if they're digging in mud and there's an opportunity to slurp up a worm or eat a little crunchy bug, they're going to do it. But I haven't looked into that too far beyond what we have here in Wisconsin. So that's just a general observation.
We do have a question from online also. And just a reminder to our online visitors that you can use the chat window, and it might not be visible if you have your full screen open. So if you minimize, you might be able to see it. So our online question is, I was once told you can eat porcupine raw as a wilderness survival strategy. Have you ever heard this? If so, what's your favorite recipe?
Well, when I'm eating porcupine raw, I just kind of dig in.
Sorry, that was me.
Okay. I've not eaten porcupine raw. I gave this presentation at a library in Niagara, Wisconsin, and I had a ringer in there who she has done everything. She's eaten porcupines, she's mounted them, she's woven their quills into ornate Ojibwa headbands, and she said that porcupine is delicious if it's prepared right. I would counter that anything is delicious if it's prepared right, but I think if I were in a survival situation, porcupines would be one of the first things I would look for, because even with my cane, I could probably track them down, and you can kill them with a rock. Although I have to admit, I tried to get out once and take a picture when my foot was in a cast, and one got away from me. but I thought I'm never going to tell anybody that because it's too embarrassing. As far as eating porcupine raw, sure. I mean, theoretically, you could eat lots of meats raw, but I would always warn people that wild animals don't have antibiotics. They're exposed to all the pathogens and parasites and fungal infections and diseases that the rest of us are. So just keep in mind that it'd have to be a pretty dire survival situation. And you would probably be dealing with the after effects of that for probably 6 to 8 weeks. So, just keep that in mind. I think I would do it if I had to. But they're exposed to the same kind of disease as any other animal would be. Yeah.
I read somewhere that porcupine quills have some antibacterial properties that help if they fall out of a tree and impale themselves. Is that true, or do you know anything about that?
Well, according to the research I've done, porcupines can fall and they can impale themselves because the quills are pointy on both ends. If they fall far enough, they actually die from the trauma, the actual puncture wounds. I haven't heard anything about anything special being secreted. I suppose it's possible that, like any animal on their skins, they transport oils. So there may be that their own body has developed some sort of immune response to something they might carry, but I haven't seen anything in the literature about a special adaptation to that effect. Okay.
Just about winter, when it's 20, 30 below zero, I'll see porcupine up in the very top of usually popples, and they will stay there for a week, sometimes 2 weeks, and it don't appear to move. I've thought they're dead, and then one day they're on the ground. Rather than denning, why are they there in the top of a tree in that weather?
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to, they do have a defense mechanism. They have the quills, so they're pretty safe from predation on the ground. But losing those quills comes at a terrible cost. They could be injured themselves by quills pushing in. They have to grow new quills, which is a big metabolic expense. If they can sit and keep their motion activity to a minimum, they can slow their metabolism down like a lot of rodents, and they can really reduce how much food they need to take in. So other than the potential risk of an avian predator, which a lot of them migrate out this time of year, we get a couple that migrate in. So maybe a great gray owl or a snow owl might pick them off. But generally speaking, it's a logical strategy. Now, why they go all the way to the top? Maybe they're harassed by squirrels or other animals that might come in the tree. I guess I haven't seen anything that indicates that. The only thing I've ever seen is they try to get as far out on branches as they can to get away from each other or other animals. So I would guess that's why they do that, is to keep their metabolic expenditure at a minimum. And plus you can see a long ways. They can't see very well, but they can smell well. So being up there, maybe they can pick up scents better.
I didn't know that they were the quills were sharp at both ends. What is the evolutionary advantage to that?
Well, so I would think there's a couple of things. One is the ejection mechanism. They have to, because they have they have the skin that they can flex and open up the pore. If it's narrow at the bottom, it's easier to let go. The other would be if an animal bites in, pulls back, and then bites again, you get double the power on that quill if it's pointed on both ends. So I think from that standpoint, the pain lingers enough for the porcupine to get away, or more likely, like with my dog, going in and getting nailed once was enough, and the porcupine didn't have to come out of the hole head first. It was able to just wait out the dog. So I think it's really more a matter of extending the pain for the predator. But I haven't seen anything in the literature to support or refute that. Yeah.
So for populations, what's like the constraint on population sizes of porcupines? I mean, if you got, they're kind of a rare sight, but if you got an herbivore that doesn't have a lot of predation, whole lot of trees around, even with the small litter size, I guess in essence, why aren't there more porcupines around?
Foresters. I got a forester in the crowd going, no, back in the day, there was a study done at Sand Hill Wildlife Area, southern Wisconsin, and it looked at all the different kinds of trees, and they definitely prefer some trees over others. And so, they're not very good at walking, so dispersion can be a problem. So I think, honestly, if you look at all the factors, the biggest factor that affects them on a regular basis, especially in modern times, is that one young, the one offspring. It's really easy to wipe out an entire population's recruitment class in a small area. Because of their impact to trees, especially highly visible in trees that are harder to grow, I had foresters that would tell me all the time, especially private foresters, that they would carry a pistol when they're in the field specifically for shooting porcupines. And anyone that's ever had a porcupine like chew on their deer blind or chew on the siding could understand their frustration. It's a cash crop you're trying to grow. So it's certainly understandable when you don't seem to have a lot of other options. The easiest solution to suppress the local population is extermination. So, but I think low fecundity is probably the primary measure to keep populations from getting out of control. That, and there are some predators that specialize in porcupines. There's fishers are very adept at interacting with porcupines and winning. They run in circles, and the porcupine's always trying to stay butt first, to the enemy butt first. So they'll run around him, and the porcupine keeps trying to keep his butt to the head, loses track or stumbles or gets dizzy, whatever the case may be. And as soon as they start to teeter, the fisher goes in for the soft underbelly where there aren't any spines, and they're able to get in and kill, and they get the meat from the inside. They actually kind of peel them like a banana. I've seen the carcasses peeled before. It's pretty interesting. So there are some other bobcats. Bobcats eat a lot of them. Coyotes aren't quite as nimble as bobcats, but the healthy populations of fur bearers and predators is another thing that probably helps, especially in northern Wisconsin.
We have a couple online questions. One is a follow-up. What is the estimated population of porcupines in Wisconsin?
Great question. I have no idea. This is what I refer to as the tragedy of the commons. Some of our most common wildlife species, we don't have any census data on, or minimal census. At least we have frog and toad surveys, so we track frog songs, right? But we don't really look at populations of porcupines as an unmanaged species, as an uncontrolled animal. They're just looked at as something that's in the background. Not to say it's always going to be that way. There may be a time where this animal is found to be an important indicator for some sort of environmental factor, and maybe then it'll get more attention. But right now, the only research I've seen on porcupine populations is impacts to different tree species and the forestry concerns. It's more about the trees than the animals. Well, I'm starting to call on people. Sorry.
Oh, do you have a question up top? I was just wondering what the range is. Oh, he asks, what is their range?
What the range is?
Like spatial range?
How far south? Well, they don't go so they're throughout Canada, Western US, New England, New York, and Pennsylvania. Our population here doesn't get south of Pennsylvania. So basically, the North American porcupine, because it doesn't hibernate, survives as far south as where the snow line basically stops. And then the other porcupine species take over.
Question back here.
Okay.
You mentioned they favor a particular tree species, and I'm curious which ones they like above others and if there's a reason why.
Yeah, so in my PowerPoint, I have a really poor table that's been scanned out of a paper that's got some of that information. It's tree species that aren't doing very well right now or aren't extremely prevalent across yellow birch, hemlock, white pine. And so I don't know if it's because, I mean, I wouldn't pick pine normally, but I think in the winter I can see it because, you know, there's still quite a bit of nutrient processing going on. But I, I don't know if there's really, honestly, from the papers that I read, different states compared studies, and the porcupines in different states had different preferences. And so I don't know if it's a nutrient requirement thing, or if it's because it's easier to climb them or eat the bark. There are a lot of different philosophies toward that, but nothing conclusive.
A few other online questions. Are there any current or historical uses for the quills?
It's a great question. Yeah, there are. As a matter of fact, there are some people here in northern Wisconsin that go around and collect quills from road-killed porcupines. And you'll always know them when you see them. They pick the porcupine up and they put it on a wet newspaper or wet grocery bags, wet paper bags, and they roll them up in there. And when you unroll them, the quills will stick in the wet paper and come right out of the dead porcupine. And then they can take them and they can use them. So the Ojibwe tribe is one of the best known tribes. The Ojibwe are best known for their porcupine quill art. There's a lot of that available online. You can see it. You just search porcupine quill art. But I've got, what is it? They've got headbands, chokers, bracelets, earrings, baskets, ornamental wall hangings. So they said they use both the natural color and they'll dye them different colors to get patterns. So most of it is ornamental or ceremonial.
A couple other online ones, maybe follow-ups or repeats about how large they get and how long they live.
Yeah, so an adult can get, 30 pounds? I can't remember the length. I think it's 18 inches. It's got to be more than that. But 24 to 30 inches long and weigh up to 30 pounds. In the wild, they've been documented right around 6 to 8 years, but in captivity, they've lived up to 18 years. So they're extremely long lived, which is another thing that you should think about before taking one on as a pet. You know, it's a big responsibility feeding a porcupine for 18 years. I'm just saying, it's a lot of boughs to cut.
Another online question is, why are their teeth orange?
Why are their teeth orange? It's because they chew on tree bark, and the tannins from the tree bark will rub off on their gums and the tops of their teeth, and then stick to the enamels. And then as they chew and start to wear that layer off, it gets whiter closer to the tip.
The quills aren't, sorry, the quills aren't thermoregulation, they're just protection, or?
Yeah, no, the question, the quills do not really help, other than like right now I've got my winter hairdo on. It gives me quite a bit more heat. It's on the top of my head. You know, when you're talking about porcupines, it's not quite like fur bearers that put on the special under fur and get a thicker coat in the winter. Their quills are pretty much the same year round. So while it likely may help cut the wind in some cases, think about all the ice that can form on those quills when they're out in the weather. You know, there's probably some disadvantages to that as well.
Are the quills basically specialized nails or hair? What are they?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. They are specialized hairs. I mean, they are made of a protein like hair is, but they're grown out of a follicle and they are replaced. Yeah, good question. Modified hairs.
So you said the quills can regrow? Yeah. So how long does it take for a regrowth of a quill then?
I probably have that right here. I have a lot of stuff. It's just a matter of getting to it. Oh, they have as many as 30,000 quills in their body. That's a lot of quills to grow. Yeah. Modified hairs with microscopic scaly hooks at the base. Last option for defense. Okay, so I don't have how long it takes for them to grow. So I don't know. That's another one I'm going to have to add to my list. I think it's like hairs and animals or feathers. There's always some in different stages of development, so that when they use some up, they have some others that are starting and not fully developed. But that's a good question. I don't think I have exactly how long it takes to grow one quill from start to finish. You stumped me on that one.
We have another online question. Do porcupines have a symbiotic relationship with any other animal?
It's a great question. So we do know of some symbiotic relationships. Coyotes and badgers are my favorite example. They'll hunt cooperatively together. Porcupines, because they prey on trees and because they steal dens, probably haven't been real successful in finding friends. Beavers maybe, I suppose, but no, I haven't seen anything about porcupines. They don't even normally get along with other porcupines. But whenever I say that, somebody will tell me they saw this thing once. So if I'm wrong and you know of something, feel free to pass it on.
I had a young porcupine in the back of my property, and it was probably a quarter the size of a full-grown, and I don't remember what time of year it was. But your indication is that they get quills very early on. And,
Yeah.
And I didn't try to pet this, but it looked more like long hairs and did not have the appearance of quills at all. And I've seen a lot of porcupines.
Yeah, so remember, they can only grow quills as big as their body will allow them to grow. So young porcupines have very small, short, fine quills. One of the first times I gave this talk at the Florence Natural Resource Center, and I had a local wildlife rehabilitator from Iron Mountain that said, "Can I bring a porcupine?" And I said, "Oh, that'd be great. That sounds really like a good idea." And she shows up and she starts armoring up. She's got leather gloves on, and I'm like, "You're going to take it out of the box?" She's like, "Oh no, those quills will go right through this." And she takes out 2 pot lids, and I said, "What are you going to do with those?" And she's like, "It's the only way I can handle the porcupine." And she gets it out, and it's this big. It was orphaned, she's a rehabilitator, so it was less than 6 months old, not really ready to live on its own. So she was taking care of it. But its quills were so sharp that they would go right through her heavy leather gloves that she used for raptors, for birds. And so she brought it out and let people see it, and then it ran around the room, and she chased it with the 2 pot lids until she could kind of scoop it up and get it back in the kennel. So if you're wondering, why doesn't Jeremy walk around with a porcupine giving this talk, besides the fact that it can live for up to 18 years, and they're only cute for a couple of months. Yeah, they have, just think about it like fiberglass. I mean, they're small, but they're extremely painful, and they're hardened within an hour and a half of birth. So, but if you want to pet one next time, and let me know. I mean, I only go by this, what the rehabilitators tell me. And I've tried talking to Wild Instincts before and said, "Can I get one when I do talks like this?" And they said, "We don't keep them for shows. We rehabilitate them and let them go with minimal interaction with people." So I've thought about from time to time setting a live trap, catching one, bring it to the talk, and then letting it go again, but somehow never get around to it.
There's not many animals that can digest bark. Is there something special about their enzymes or their gut fauna that allows them to get nutrients out of things other animals can't?
That's a good question. So the rough grouse, for example, has a special modified chamber that allows them to process like parts of the aspen tree. The porcupine, I haven't seen anything. For example, they don't chew cud. That's what I would have expected, like a cow or a deer, that maybe they chew cud to help them break that down. but I haven't seen anything in the literature that supports that. I think what it is they try to, if they chew bark, they drop it because they're really trying to get to the cambium underneath. And so they get to slightly more digestible material. That being said, I'm confident that, well, rodents, yes, Lord. Rodents in general tend to, you guys heard that too, right? Rodents in general tend to be able to eat more roughage than we can normally eat, so they've got to have some special modifications to that effect, but nothing I've seen beyond normal rodent stuff like beavers.
Yeah, we had a mystery last winter. Trees around the house were all being stripped, maple trees, young maples, right out to the end of the small branches. And I kept looking for the porcupine, never saw him. Neighbor thought it was squirrels doing it. Is that possible?
Oh yeah, matter of fact, it's a little bit, it's pretty likely. Yeah, so one of my favorite books in the whole world, if you ever read or listened to my Mass Biologist articles, is Mammals of Wisconsin by Hartley Jackson. It's an excellent book. It's from before my time, but it is the definitive book on mammals in Wisconsin. And in that book, he's got a graphic of what the different kinds of squirrels' chew marks on a maple tree look like. And so like the red squirrels are like all over the place and really mismatched, and the gray squirrels are way more methodical. Yeah, it's more than likely it's the squirrels. I get a lot of calls about that. Probably not this time of year, but coming in the next couple of months, they'll start to pick up. And I always say, well, we like the syrup, we like the sap, you can't blame the squirrels for liking the same thing. Normally porcupines can't hold on to bigger trees that well and can't really get into that heavy of a bark, so I wouldn't expect them to be the main culprit. But that's not to say once it's opened up, they may not get in there and help themselves to a little something.
Any other questions this evening? I think that's all we have for questions.
Okay, great.
Nobody,
Thank you. I'm sorry.
nobody wants to know what to do if a porcupine's chewing on their siding.
Oh,
Nobody
there you
wants to
go.
know what to do if porcupines are chewing on their tree stand. Nobody out in the internet, nobody in this room.
I do.
Well, so I said they're easy to exclude, right? You can put up smooth tin siding. You can cover stuff with hardware mesh. You can maybe put something on to make it less palatable, like pepper spray or Vicks Vapor Rub or something like that. But the key word here is carbolinium. That's what we put on like our plywood signs that we put up on our state wildlife areas to discourage them from chewing on it. Carbolinium is a chemical that horse owners might know. It's what you put on the top of the stall to keep them from cribbing. It's anti-cribbing solution. Yeah, a couple people shaking their heads. Horses nod just because they're in the stall and they don't have anything else to do. But you put this stuff on there and it's not palatable and they give up on it. It's very effective for us on plywood signs, for example. And I've had folks put it on with success, like on their stairs at their cottage or on their siding. There are some other rodent repellents like Repel or bitter apple. You can try different things, but people have had most success with either smooth tin, which isn't as attractive but highly effective, or getting cribbing solution, which usually you can get through a feed supply or horse supply store.
We did have one sneak in online. If wild animals get quilled, will they die or will the quills dissolve or fall out over time?
Yes.
Fair.
Yes. I have a really gory slideshow of animals that have been killed by quills. And it's usually because they get in the brain case through the eyes and the mouth, the roof of the mouth, the palate, nose. If they don't get into those vital areas, they fall out in a couple of weeks. A pus sac forms around it and they itch, and yeah, I know it's gross, but it's my job. So it's like any other foreign body. You get a foreign body, like a sliver under your skin, and eventually you get some liquid forming around it and you scratch it and it pops out. That will happen with porcupine quills. So Like I said, there was a cougar that one of the ones from 12, 13 years ago sighted in Wisconsin was killed in Maine. They found out it was the same cougar because they looked at the quills that were still embedded in its face. So yes, wild animals will carry those quills with them for quite some time. The ones in the sensitive parts of the face could cause injury or blinding. But if they're like the owl swooping down and it just got killed instantly. So normally they're either going to die instantly from their injuries or they're going to recover and they're just going to be kind of miserable for a while.
Okay, thank you very much to Jeremy Holtz. Thanks to everyone for coming and thanks for asking your questions. Thanks to all of our sponsors, to Oak Fire, to the Lakeland Badger Chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, Kemp Natural Resources Station, Trout Lake Station, whom I forget, Minocqua Public Library, and thanks again to the Brittingham Foundation. And again, one more time, thanks to Oak Fire for hosting us. Remember, our next event will be on January 5th, 2022. Michelle Nault of the Wisconsin DNR will talk about aquatic invasive species in our lakes. And if you want to sign up for email reminders of our events, we have a little pad of paper in the back. You can sign up there if you're not already on our list. Or you can go to our website and just go to contact us, and there's a place where you can sign up online. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you next year.